Okay, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ramiz. Welcome to our next webinar on Muslim roots. We do a monthly webinar on different topics, and we've been working with Sister Nazi for past 2 months now. She's already given us a great webinar, which you can find on our website on Muslim roots in America. Today we have another very interesting topic called the Founding Fathers on Islam and Muslims. There's a lot of confusion on the topic. This is part of our nationwide campaign on recognized Muslim roots. We're trying to basically bring awareness that Muslims do have roots in this country, and it's been for a long time, since even before its foundation and establishment, we have roots in this country, and we're trying to educate the population and let people know that we do have a history, we have records, and Sister Nazi will share that inshallah with you today. So that's what this webinar is about. It's part of our national campaign. You can find out more about it at www.icnacsj.org/RMR, Recognized Muslim Roots. So you can also please help us by contacting your representatives and asking them to support HR Resolution 869, which basically recognizes Muslim roots in this country at a government level. So please go to our website for more information, www.icnacsj.org. Having said that, today's speaker, just give a quick bio of her. She has a master's in education as an educational diagnostician, and has been a administrator and teacher at a Sunday school in Texas for the past 10 years. She has also taught at Muslim Community School for 2 years. She currently works full-time in Denton ISD in Texas. She assesses and manages the needs of children with disabilities. That's her specialty. She founded Sprouting Education, which provides educational consultation. In addition, she runs the website sproutingeducation.com. that provides resources for Muslim school teachers, and she has published textbooks for Muslim American children. She's also working on a book on the topic of Muslim roots in America, which we would highly recommend you to buy once she's done with it and she's published it. So I'm gonna give it to her from here, and she'll take it she will take it away from here, inshallah.
Oh, I think I lost you.
Yes, Sister Nazi, can you hear it? Actually, I lost the video, but are you still there?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. What happened in the video?
Someone tried to call me, so my computer is connected to my phone.
Okay.
So I just need to connect again, I guess.
Okay. Okay, she'll be joining us soon. She just got disconnected. She'll be back. While we're waiting for her, oh, she's there. Okay, she's there. Okay, go ahead. We can see you.
All right, great. So as Brother Ramiz said, this is the second of 3 webinars about the history of Islam in America. And in the first webinar, I gave a pretty long introduction about myself. And I also talked about how I came to learn that my 10th great-grandfather was a convert, a Dutch man who converted to Islam in the late 1500s and sent his 2 sons to live in New Amsterdam, the first colony in America. And then one of his sons was credited for being the first settler of Brooklyn, New York. In this webinar, I hope to go over 3 of our founding fathers. They are George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. And I want to tell you 3 things about each of them. One is their interactions with the Muslims, what they thought about Islam and what they thought about Muslims, what they knew about Muslims. And also, very important, I like to tell you about their religious beliefs. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that you actually will have a strong connection to the heroism that these founding fathers played in challenging Christianity, and you'll find some kind of connection and newfound respect with these founding fathers. What I've learned from these, from studying the history of our founding fathers, I've developed this new sense of patriotism to my country, a new feeling of belonging in America. You may already know some things about the history of Islam in America. Maybe perhaps you might know that Thomas Jefferson, for example, had a Qur'an, but you may not know where the Qur'an came from or how he came to own it, or much about it. You probably do not know that Benjamin Franklin actually quoted the Sirah pretty accurately at a time when no Sirah was available in English. And you probably did not know that the last piece of work that Benjamin Franklin published actually began with the words Bismillah. And I'm going to talk about, if you stick around to the end, I'll talk about how that came to be. So I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share with my slides. All right, so getting started with our founding fathers and Islam. In order to know about our founding fathers and the history, you have to really understand the context of the time that they lived in, the philosophy and everything that contributed to that time. The founding fathers grew up in an age of enlightenment. They were very disenchanted with the church. And at that time, the church was not just the church. They were the government. They were everything. They ordained the kings and queens. They also had no tolerance for ideas that were opposite of the church, even if those ideas were pretty logical and reasonable. So the Age of Enlightenment spurred all kinds of new things. It spurred democracy, revolutions, namely the French Revolution, all kinds of scientific findings. You may have heard of Sir Isaac Newton. He was an enlightened person. And enlightened people didn't see religion, politics, science, or philosophy as different ideas. They were all one and the same. They were all an idea of progress. And that progress was established by God, and people could realize this progress through logic. So concepts that are associated with the Age of Enlightenment are the ones I have on the slide. The idea of liberty, and they actually meant liberty from the church. Tolerance for other religions. A constitutional government, not a government based on the church. The idea of fraternity and brotherhood is very close to the idea of brotherhood that is taught in Islam. The idea that God gave natural rights, and also the scientific method was just a natural process of coming to learn what is logical and reasonable. So, what a lot of people don't understand is that the whole Age of Enlightenment was really inspired by some Muslim concepts, namely the translation of Ibn Tufail's Hay ibn Yaqzan. And this was first translated into Latin by a man named Edward Pocock in 1674. He was the chair of Arabic at Oxford University. And this book that he translated really is believed to have contributed a lot to the beginning of the Age of Reason, or the Enlightened Age. This book basically says that there was a man who was was stranded on an island as a baby, and he was raised by gazelles. And he was never taught any formal religion, but on this island, he comes to know God and know all the principles of religion just by simply observing nature around him. And this was a very liberating idea, because even though he came to know God without any formal religious teachings, so he came to know God without any formal religious teachings, and this was a big threat to the church. So a little bit more about Pokak. He did travel to Syria in hopes of teaching Muslims about Christianity or to be Christians, but he also had a lot of respect for Muslims. He recorded hadith in Latin, and those hadiths were not published until well after he had died, but they were kept handwritten notes and his students would study from them. He wanted the people at Oxford University to know that Muslims were misunderstood, and he encouraged the use of primary sources and facts rather than secondary sources and biases when talking about Muslims. And one neat fact about him is he was known for drinking coffee, which was a very Arab thing to do, to drink coffee because English mostly drank tea. Now, the whole idea that you didn't really need religion to know God actually developed into a phenomenon or a philosophy called Deism. And Deism saw that saw that God is like a clockmaker. That if you put all the pieces of a clock into a bag and shook them up, you would not necessarily have a working clock, but that you needed a clockmaker to put all the intricate parts together to make the clock work. And once the clock was put together and set in motion by this clockmaker, the clock didn't really need much more interference after that. So deists did believe in a God, and they did especially reject the divinity of Jesus. But they did not necessarily pray to God because they did not feel that God would interfere in their lives once he had set a perfect life in motion. Another philosophy that was influencing our founding fathers was Freemasonry. And many of the enlightened people had to meet in secret because they had to avoid the church. They were afraid of the church. In the Freemasonry lodges, they would discuss religion, politics, philosophy, and these lodges would be centers for innovation and progress. The interesting thing about Freemasons is they would never refer to God as Jesus, and they did not believe that Jesus was God. They referred to God as the director of human events, providence, the great ruler of events, the supreme governor, architect of the universe, the author of all good. And the way they describe God is very similar to Islam's view of one God. Another influence on our founding fathers was the Anglican Church. Now, the Anglican Church did teach that Jesus was the Son of God. However, I find it interesting that they held the idea that you should not use Jesus's name or mention Jesus's name so dear to them that they were very adamant about, in all their public documents and things, they would always make sure never to mention Jesus and always to just mention God. So this slide has a picture of a will, and this was a common will for an Anglican at that time. And most of the wills started with, "In the name of God, amen." Very much like how a Muslim would start their documents, "In the name of God, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim." The use of only using the word God and not Jesus left an open interpretation of God for any person that was reading the document. And this really made it possible for the idea of freedom of religion to exist. George Washington himself never used Jesus' name in any public address. Instead, he would use Masonic words such as providence or supreme architect of the universe. There was only one time where I could find that he used the word Jesus, and that was in a document called the Prayer for the Nation. And it was very obvious that he was not the only author of this document. And there is even evidence that he did not want to use the word Jesus at the end of that document. So that's a little bit about the philosophical things that were going on at the time. Another thing you have to know is that the Barbary Wars were going on. So the Barbary Wars really defined the political status of the time. In order to understand the Barbary Wars, you have to know that the Ottoman Empire was really a superpower of the world. And at the time, when people fought wars, they fought them on ships. In my previous webinar, I told you about how a lot of European sailors converted to Islam and fought on the side of the Ottomans. So the Barbary states are 4. There's Tripoli, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunis. These are all in North Africa. And they would actually go to Europe and America and take Americans or Europeans as slaves and take them to America, I mean, take them to Africa as slaves, just kind of the opposite of what you usually think. In order to be taken as a slave by these North Africans, you had to pay a tribute. And the tributes became so expensive that early America could not afford to pay for them any longer. In the beginning, when America was formed, the founding fathers had no choice but to pay these very expensive tributes because they needed independence from England, and England was protecting them with their navy. So our founding fathers, I find it interesting that our founding fathers lived in a society that actually saw Muslims, much like society sees Muslims today, as terrorists. But they were able to separate that idea of religion and politics, so much so that they negotiated with the Barbary states to the point where they went to war with Tripoli, but they made an ally with Morocco. So they were very familiar with Muslims as a result of these Barbary Wars. So now we're going to talk about George Washington and his religion. Now, George Washington was accused of being a deist, but we know that he wasn't a deist because he was reported to pray every morning in his library on one knee. And in this picture, he's praying for his army at the Battle of Valley Forge. However, many historians would believe that he doubted the Trinity. And there's some evidence of that. First of all, he was a Mason, and Masons did not believe in the Trinity. Another thing is that every time he went to church, if the pastor was offering communion, and communion doesn't happen every Sunday, but it does happen maybe one time a month, one Sunday every month. He would actually get up and leave the church to the point where he would even leave Martha Washington sitting there at the church alone. On his deathbed, George Washington did not call a priest, and his funeral was a mixture of Anglican and Masonic rituals. And George Washington he went to many churches. He attended Anglican, Catholic, and Quaker churches, but he refused to endorse any single religion. And we know that George Washington fundamentally believed in the freedom of religion. There are a couple of quotes about his belief in the freedom of religion. When asked if he would support that people would pay for the churches that are religions that they profess, he said that he wasn't objected to that idea, but he mentioned that Jews and Muslims, or Mohammedans as he called it then, should have some kind of proper relief from that requirement, if that was the case. And when he heard that Jews were experiencing prejudice in America, he wrote in response to that situation. He said to the new government gave to bigotry no sanction. George Washington had Muslim slaves. You can go, one of the links that I have provided is a link to the Mount Vernon website, and there are historians on there, and that is where I got the information from those historians that there were Muslims on the farm at Mount Vernon. One of Washington's most prized slaves was a man named Sambo Anderson. He was a carpenter, and he assisted a man named Bernard Sears, who was a famous carpenter, who made the wooden mantle in Mount Vernon. Washington gave Sambo Anderson a lot of freedoms. For example, he was able to take a boat out across a creek to the next farm to visit his family on the weekends. And he was also, on his days off, able to hunt game and harvest honey to sell to Washington. He saved that money and was able to buy his freedom eventually. So Washington gave his slaves an opportunity to earn their freedom. And Sambo Anderson was so important to George Washington that he was quoted by the Gazette upon Washington's death. Sambo Anderson told the Gazette that George Washington was very concerned about perfection. He said that George Washington would sometimes borrow his boat, and when he did, he would be sure to drag it 20 feet to the place where he had taken it from. And that when he watched Sambo build wooden cages for the animals, he would encourage him to use his plumb so that he got the posts perfectly straight. Sambo Anderson wasn't the only Muslim at Mount Vernon. There are reports that other Muslims, Fatima, Little Fatima, and Naila, were all Muslims who lived at Mount Vernon. And if you look at these pictures that I've put up, two portraits of George Washington actually have a Muslim slave in the background. We know that it's a Muslim slave because he has a turban, and the historians do report that the Muslim slaves often did wear turbans. And when asked if George Washington would be willing to have non-Christians on his farm, he said, working for him, he said if they are good workmen, they may be of Asia, Africa, or Europe, they may be Mohammedans, Jews, or Christians of any sect, or atheists. Another interesting thing is that George Washington had Muslims fight alongside of him in his army. There are at least 5 or 6 Muslim names that we can find in the log of the soldiers that fought in the Continental Army. And there were maybe several others, but I do know, I'm going to talk about 2 of them. The first is Peter Salem. Peter Salem is believed by many to have been a Muslim. He has a stamp, a US stamp that is published after him, in honor of him. And the reason why people think that he is Muslim is because he came from a part of Africa that was majority Muslim. And he also had skills that people from that area, Muslims from that area, had, like basket weaving and fish net making, that were similar to the skills that the Africans had, the Muslims had in Africa. He changed his name from his slave's name when he was freed to Salem for his last name. And when asked why he changed his name, or an explanation about his name, the explanation that was given that it was like peace, like salam. So these are the reasons why people think that he was a Muslim. We don't know for sure, but those are sort of some clues. Peter Salem was credited for killing John Pitcairn, a major British soldier or colonel in the British Army. Peter Salem fought under the command of Colonel Nixon in the Battle of Bunker Hill. And as they advanced toward the British, he was commanded by Colonel Nixon, "Don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes." And as they got closer, Colonel Nixon said, "This day is ours." And that's when Peter Salem took the fateful shot. After all the shots were fired, the soldiers came to Colonel Nixon and told them that it was Peter Salem who made the actual fateful shot. The second soldier I wanted to tell you about is a man named Yusuf bin Ali. He has an angelicized name of Joseph bin Haley, and he fought under Sumter and who became Sumter County, and who founded Sumter County. And if you go to Sumter County, South Carolina, you'll see there's lots of talk. There's been some newspaper articles out about it recently too, about the Turks of Sumter County, or the Turks of South Carolina. Sumter was believed to have had indentured servants or slaves that were of Turkish origin or Muslim origin. And they had a sort of mulatto look. So people were pretty confused about whether they thought they were black or white. So they would call them Turks. You can read more about the Turks of South Carolina by going to this book, the South Carolina's Turkish People, or you can actually even go to South Carolina's website and hear stories about the genealogy of the Turkish people there. So next we're going to Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson was raised by wealthy parents on a big farm. He learned Latin and Greek from tutors on the farm because there were no schools. And the main thing he learned was languages, so he became really good at Latin and Greek. When he was about 16 years old, he came to William and Mary College. And William and Mary College was the first college in America. It was a center for Enlightenment education. He studied law, and he studied under a man named William Small. He especially was known to have studied Arabic. And he may have even met a man named Salim the Algerian. Now, Salim the Algerian was an Algerian man who was traveling to Istanbul, and he was captured as a slave and sold up the Mississippi River. He ran away and ran through the woods of Tennessee and eventually landed in Virginia. By the time he had gotten to Virginia, he was almost dead from the elements, from having to survive the elements. He ate only berries and nuts. And when the people of Williamsburg found him, they were astonished that he could read Greek. So they had him read the Bible in Greek with William Small. So because they both had the same teacher at about the same time, it is very likely that Thomas Jefferson may have met this man, Salim the Algerian. So as I said, you probably know that Thomas Jefferson had a Qur'an, and he was interested in Arabic. But why? Well, the enlightened people saw Muhammad as a lawmaker, and they saw the Qur'an as a book of laws. And so if you are a lawyer, you should know the history of laws in the world. So of course he wanted to study the Qur'an for that reason. The copy of the Qur'an that he owned was a George Sale Qur'an, and he purchased it in 1765. And it's only in English. There's no Arabic in it. And it's translated by an English speaker, so it's not translated by an Arabic speaker. Now Thomas Jefferson may have actually purchased this book twice because his library was burned, and we don't know if he actually saved the Quran from the burn or if he replaced it. Either way, it would be remarkable that he either saved it or he tried to replace it. And this book was donated to the Library of Congress. It was among the books that were donated by Thomas Jefferson to the Library of Congress. And I don't know if you know, but Keith Ellison, the first congressman of the United States, used the Quran when he was sworn in 2003. In George Sale's Quran, there's a lot of credit given to Muslims. George Sale says in the Quran, if religious institutions of foreign nations are worth our knowledge, those of Muhammad, the lawgiver of the Arabians, the father of an empire, which in less than a century spread itself over a greater part of the world than Romans were ever a master of. A little bit more about Thomas Jefferson. He was a minister of France before he became president. He would send in envoys to the Barbary states when negotiating with the Barbary states. One of the ambassadors, the Tunisian ambassador that he talked to or negotiated with, said that his nation was that any nation that didn't accept the Prophet Muhammad was a sinner, were sinners, and that Muslims had the right to plunder them. And then any Muslim that did plunder them and be slain in that process would go to heaven. So they also had experienced this kind of misquoting of the Quran or misunderstanding of the religion from actual Muslims. But I find it interesting that Thomas Jefferson actually argued with this ambassador that America is not founded on Christianity, so they had no reason to plunder them. Thomas Jefferson arranged for an Arabic translation of the Constitution to be given to the leaders of the Barbary states so that they could see that they were not a Christian nation. And Thomas Jefferson hosted an iftar at Monticello, his home. He had to actually change the time of dinner from 3:30 to sunset. And the interesting thing is that Thomas Jefferson showed Sidi Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the Sultan of Tunisia, lots of hospitality, even though he did not agree to pay the tributes that they came to ask for. And the tradition of having an iftar of hosting an iftar was recognized by and reestablished by Hillary Clinton, and then and continued by George Bush and Barack Obama. One of the things that Thomas Jefferson was most proud of was the Virginia Statute of the Freedom of Religion Act. Now, he had many accomplishments. He was president of the United States, but he didn't put those or ask for those accomplishments to be put on his tombstone. The accomplishments that he did ask to have on his tombstone was that he was the writer of the Declaration of Independence, the father of the University of Virginia, and that he was able to help pass the Virginia Statute of the Freedom of Religion Act in 1786. And when he talked about the debate behind passing this bill, he said that at one point the legislatures wanted to insert Jesus's name into this law or this act, but that this idea of putting Jesus's name was rejected. And he said that the fact that they rejected it was proof that the legislatures meant to comprehend this act in the mantle of its protection of the Jew, the Gentile, the Christian, the Mohammedan, the Hindu, the infidel of any religion. So you can see that Thomas Jefferson was actually considered Muslims as a hypothetical future citizen. And he brought that idea to the legislatures and said, even if a Muslim wanted to be a president or a citizen, would we allow that? And the legislatures, after much debate, decided yes, they would. And I have to say that you may not know this, but Thomas Jefferson was absolutely not a Christian. Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and Thomas Jefferson very publicly did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. He used his knowledge of Greek and Latin to interpret the Bible in those more original languages of the Bible. And he ended up cutting out lots of holes in the Bible. My mother actually made a comment that that is the real Holy Bible. I thought that was funny. So the book he created was the Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. And in that, he said that Jesus did not mean to impose himself on mankind to be the Son of God. And he said that he's been convinced by the writings of men and more learned than himself of that lore. After he passed away, the religious teachings that Thomas Jefferson taught were actually developed into a religion called humanism, or a philosophy called humanism. Humanists have a book called the Humanist Bible. And in that Bible, there are actually verses from the Qur'an that they have incorporated into the book. So now that brings us to my favorite, Benjamin Franklin. So why do I regard him as my favorite? Well, he was probably the smartest person I have ever read about. And he had a lot of accomplishments. Now, while Thomas Jefferson had a lot of accomplishments, Thomas Jefferson came from a wealthy family. He was given everything from the very beginning. But Benjamin Franklin was raised by a blue-collar printer in Boston. He ran away from home when he was 15, and he landed in the New York harbor with only 2 coins in his pocket. However, by the age of 47, he was independently wealthy. Not only that, he was a well-known printer, writer, inventor, statesman, founder of several societies. He established post office, libraries, fire station, and a college, all in Pennsylvania. And he had to have been a very busy person. If you haven't read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, I highly suggest it. I'm still appalled that this great book, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, is not read by every American in our history classes. But as you can see, when I talk more about Benjamin Franklin, you may come to understand why that book is not chosen for the common American history class. So what did Benjamin Franklin think about Muslims? So I have to say, first of all, it's very well known too that Benjamin Franklin was, again, not a Christian. He did befriend a Methodist pastor named Whitefield, and he even financially supported Whitefield. But when Whitefield asked him to become Methodist, he refused. And Franklin described a project that Whitefield was working on. Whitefield wanted to make a preaching house that was open to anyone to come and preach about God. And when asked to explain this preaching house, Franklin said, even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send a missionary to preach Islam to us, Whitefield would find a pulpit at his service. So he used Muslims as an example. Now we come to my most favorite story about Benjamin Franklin and how he quoted the Sirah very accurately at a time when there was no Sirah available in English. I still have yet to have some kind of explanation about how he knew the story of the Sirah. The only thing I can conclude is that maybe he went to Oxford University and met Pocock and read some of his handwritten notes in Latin. So I don't know for sure. But in order to understand how he came to the point of quoting the Sirah, you have to know a story about the Paxton Lynch. So the story goes that the Pennsylvanians were growing in number, and they were going to the west, and they were ending up in conflicts with Native Americans. And the Paxton boys were this group of boys that actually fought with Native Americans, took these Native Americans hostage, and then after they were hostage for a while, they had killed and mutilated them. Then they marched into the town of Philadelphia, and they demanded that any Native American that was being safe housed in anyone's home, which the Quakers were known to safe house these Native Americans, he demanded that these people hand over the Native Americans to them so that they could slaughter them. They made this demand to William Penn, and William Penn put Benjamin Franklin in charge of responding to this request. Benjamin Franklin heard the Paxton boys, and then he heard their request, and then he went and did some research, and in response to the Paxton boys, he reprinted this pamphlet called The Narrative of the Late Massacres. And I have a little excerpt from this pamphlet for you. But in this pamphlet, he tells 4 stories. The first is the story that came from the Sirah. He said that you Christians say that you are better than everyone else, and that everyone else who is not a Christian is a heathen. And he said, well, let me tell you about these people you call heathens. He says, as for the Muslims, which they called them the Turks, their leader is, their founder of their religion is Muhammad, so Islam, and that they have a captain named Khalid ibn Walid. And one time, Khalid ibn Walid was taking his soldiers to battle, and he captured some prisoners. And then he told his soldiers to kill these prisoners, and they refused. And when the soldiers came back to the Prophet Muhammad, they asked him, did we do the right thing by disobeying Khalid ibn Walid? And Prophet Muhammad's response was that he was very disappointed with Khalid ibn Walid. And he said that even if Khalid ibn Walid had a heap of gold as large as Mount Uhud, that Allah would not erase the guilt that he had incurred by killing those prisoners. He doesn't stop there to make this point. He goes on to tell a story of the time of the Crusades between Salahuddin and King Arthur. Salahuddin, you probably have heard of, was one of the most well-known soldiers of the Crusades on the side of the Muslims. Salahuddin was in a battle with King Arnold, and just before Salahuddin goes to kill King Arnold asks for a drink of water. And Salahuddin refuses and kills him. And people ask, why didn't you give him a drink of water, Salahuddin? And he said, well, if I would have given him a drink of water, it would have been a sign to everyone that he was my prisoner, and then I would not have been able to kill him. So again, this was a point that Muslims had in their laws that they should not, it was not civilized to kill a prisoner. He goes on, Benjamin Franklin goes on to tell a story about people of Dagestan. Now, I have all of the internet at the tips of my finger and all kinds of information available to me, but I have not heard of Dagestan until I had read this story from Benjamin Franklin. He said that Dagestan is well, if you don't know where Dagestan is, and I looked it up now, it's a small country or a small province of Russia now, but it used to be part of Iran, and the people there still speak Farsi and have Persian and practice Persian culture. And he said the people of Dagestan, if they had captives, they would actually bring them into their homes and treat them as family members until they were released. And the last story he tells, this is the fourth and final story, was a story about a cavalier and a Moor. So in Spain, there were Muslims, and they were called Moors, and there were Catholics called Cavaliers, and they were always fighting with each other. So a Moor was sitting in his garden when all of a sudden a Cavalier jumped over his garden wall and jumped right in front of him. And he said, the Moor said to the Cavalier, what are you doing in my garden? He says, well, I'm running away from some Moors that are chasing me, and they want to kill me. So the Moor gave the Cavalier a peach as a symbol that he would not hurt him and that he would protect him as his prisoner. The Cavalier ate the peach, and then the Moor told him to stay in his garden apartment until the morning, and that he promised to take him to safety in the morning. Well, when the Moor gets back into his house, he hears a bang on the door. He opens the door and he finds a gang of Moors. And the Moors tell him that a Cavalier had just killed his own son. And he's astonished because he realizes that the very Cavalier that he had promised safety to was the Cavalier that had killed his own son. However, in the morning, the Moor woke up and took the Cavalier to safety just as he had promised. And when the Cavalier asked, "Why are you taking me to safety when I killed your son?" The Moor replied, "You are indeed guilty of my son's blood, but God is just and good, and I thank him that I am innocent of yours, and that my faith is given is preserved." So this is a really astonishing story. All four of these stories are in the narrative of the late massacres by Benjamin Franklin. And again, I do not know how he came to know these stories, because there was no internet and to find sources of literature was very difficult. So how did Benjamin Franklin come to use Bismillah at the top of the last letter that he wrote to the Gazette? Well, you have to understand that Benjamin Franklin at the end of his life became a sort of an abolitionist. And I say sort of an abolitionist because he wasn't a real abolitionist. And the reason I say he's not a real abolitionist is because real abolitionists wanted to free slaves in order to teach them about Christianity. And Benjamin Franklin had no desire to teach anyone about Christianity. So the quote from the letter is actually at the top, is on the screen. He used the words, "Allah, Bismillah, God is great, and Muhammad is his prophet." And he wasn't saying this as a Muslim. What he was doing is he was using irony and satire. He knew that the Christians thought of Muslims as barbarians, and what happened is that a representative named James Jackson made a speech in 1790, and he used the Bible and the fact that Christians were dominant or had been given rights by God over non-Christians as a justification for enslaving for slavery, or justification for slavery. And so what Franklin did was he used a pen name named Historicus, and he pretended to be a Muslim sultan, and he used the same argument that Representative James Jackson made in the context of being a Christian. Benjamin Franklin used this same argument as a Muslim in the context of being a Muslim. And he said that we as Muslims have the right to enslave Christians because they're not Muslims. And of course, he even goes on to misquote the Qur'an as a Muslim who had these kinds of beliefs might have done. So that is how he came to use the words Bismillah, God is great, and Muhammad is his prophet at the top of this last letter. I just find it remarkable that he even knew the word Bismillah in Arabic and knew the practice of putting it at the top of a letter like the way Muslims do. So the final thing I want to talk about is Benjamin Franklin's religion. Benjamin Franklin, as I said, was not a Christian, and he actually tried to create his own religion. It was called the Society of the Free and Easy, and it consisted of 13 virtues. I've listed them here: temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, and so on. And he said that anyone who wanted to join his religion would have to practice each of these 13 virtues one at a time for a week. So for example, if he was practicing humility, he would have to go around and try not to say I or me in order to realize how hard it is to be humble for a week. Now, this religion didn't really take off. Benjamin Franklin had so many ideas in his head that he had a hard time focusing on getting people to join this religion. But what did take off was his writings in the Poor Richard Almanack. Now, the writings of the Poor Richard Almanack actually came to give Americans their identity as Americans and separate from the British, which actually part of what has led to the Revolutionary War and separation from the British. Now, unlike most almanacs, most almanacs will have reports about when to plant your crops or what kind of weather to expect. This almanac included sayings, and the sayings taught little lessons. So you may have heard the saying, a penny saved is a penny earned, or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, those came from Poor Richard's Almanack, and they were written by Benjamin Franklin. And some of these sayings actually sounded like hadith, like God helps those who help themselves. And when Benjamin Franklin was asked by some Christians about his religion, he said, "Here is my creed." And I'm going to read this because it's very powerful. And I think you'll recognize some of the words that he uses. He said, "Here is my creed. I believe in one God, creator of the universe, that he governs it by his providence, that he ought to be worshiped, that the most acceptable service we can render to him is doing good unto his other children, that the soul of man is immortal and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this. And I take this to be the fundamental principles of all sound religion, and I regard them as you do in whatever sect I meet with them. As to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think the system of morals and religion he left them to us, as he left them to us, the best the world ever saw or ever is likely to see. But I apprehend it has received various corrupting changes, and I have, with most of the present dissenters of England, some doubts to his divinity, though it is a question I do not dogmatize upon, having never studied it. I think it needless to busy myself with it now, when I expect soon the opportunity of knowing the truth with less trouble. So I hope you've come to develop some newfound respect for these founding fathers and learn to connect with the founding fathers in a way you haven't before from these stories. And my stories are coming soon in a book called Islamic American Heritage. It's a textbook for children, and I've designed these stories for children to learn. You can learn more about when the book is coming out from my website, IslamicSchoolResources.com. So inshallah, the next webinar is going to be about Muslims in around the time of the Civil War in America. I hope you enjoyed all this, and I look forward to hearing your questions. I think we have a few minutes for that.
Thank you so much for that very intensive and very informing webinar. There's a lot of new stuff that I had never heard of before, definitely. So I would love to, I'm probably going to try to listen to it again, actually, because I want to study some other, re-look into some other things that you mentioned, which I think is very interesting, especially the quotes from Benjamin Franklin. Actually, we don't have a method of asking questions through here. So actually it's not going to be possible, but they can definitely send it to us, or they can visit your website. And by the way, we have, there are a lot of links that Sister Nazi sent to us that we put it in the more information section of the YouTube video. So if you go there, you can look it up. There's her WordPress address is in there as well. She has a blog. You can go there and send her the questions directly. She'll be happy to respond to you. But I think that's about it. Otherwise we don't have any method here of collecting questions online live today yet, or today at least. But in the future, we hope to do that, inshallah. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Sister Nazi, before we close?
They could probably put the questions in the comment section, and I'll check them there, right? For the YouTube. Yes, you can do that. They can you can put it in the comment section on the YouTube video. But I think the best method is to go to your website and do it through the blog. Because you may not, actually, you can put it in the YouTube section as well. She'll respond to you using her YouTube account, I guess. She can respond to the questions in the comment section as well. So you can do that as well. Yes, definitely. Okay, so hopefully, inshallah, we'll see you all again in the next month's webinar, where she'll talk about the Civil War and the Muslim impact, or the Muslim influence, or Muslims that were present during the Civil War. Again, this is all part of our national campaign to recognize Muslim roots in this country, that we do have roots, we have a history, and we have a legacy. And for more information, please visit our website, www.icnacsj.org/RMR. And we'll see you again, Sister Nazi, next month, inshallah. All right.
So much for coming
Good.
on.
Looking forward to it. All right.
Okay, guys, good night.